with Ashley and Constantine. As you can see, we have the alien spaceship because our conversations are out of this world. If you've never tuned into one yet, really, it's two people that met. I was on Constantine's podcast. We had a really great podcast. He informed me last week that after the podcast, he looked at some of my videos and thought either this girl's done really, really crazy or she's got something. And then as he's gone forward, maybe switched your mind a little bit.
Just a bit, yeah.
Just a bit. So we would connect on Zoom calls. He's in Canada. I'm in Florida. And we would just have these amazing deep conversations. And we both have a YouTube channel. And one time we were like, let's just do these live because they're so intriguing for us. We can't imagine that other people couldn't benefit from them as well. So really, this is just your... you get to be the fly on the wall of Constantine and I, like just sorting through random topics and going down rabbit holes at
not
least
so random
2
though,
Sundays.
right? They're not very random. That's the funny part. They seem random,
yes,
but yet they're so important to, well, either you or I or both of us or the audience.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you want me to introduce today?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, you took the lead, so go for it.
Yeah, so today we were trying to decide what to chat about, and I was like, how about everything is a story? And I'm just going to give a little background of how this popped in my mind today. Yesterday, Patrick and I went to an event for a friend that her business is kind of full launching now. And we ran into another couple, and a dear friend of mine, she just got certified in laughter yoga. And I was like, oh, that is so cool. And then this story popped in my mind. And I was like, what have you, we always talk about you cry or you laugh so hard you cry. I said, but have you ever experienced where you've cried so hard you laughed? And one mushroom trip I took, that occurred and it blew my mind because we so often look at the other way. And in that moment, I realized that it was the story. Me crying and feeling sadness and pain and hurt was the story. And when I shifted the story, it shifted to laughter. When I released the weight and was able to see it from a different place. And so I think the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we learn, the stories we see is literally what operates everything in our life. And that's why BDSM, people find pleasure in pain because pain and pleasure like literally are the same exact response in your body. It's the story that's behind it. So I don't know. And this goes down so many rabbit holes. Like you and I talked about the other day with your marketing for your event that you're going to share later is, stories are like a quadrillion gazillion dollar business. Like every good business has a good story. That's how you get people to buy. And the reason why is because that's all we live by. Is stories. So either you can relate to a story or you want this story. I'll share the Nike story quick. And I think this one is so powerful. Is that Simon Sinek shares about at one time the founder of Nike was at this conference. He's like, hey, if you run, stand up. Then he's like, hey, if you run, twice a week, stay standing or sit down. And he kind of went all the way down and people kept sitting until he was like, hey, if you run day or night, rain or snow, whatever, stay standing. And there was like one guy in the room. And he's like, that's who Nike is for. We are the guy under the lamppost cheering you on when you are running through whatever it is and that you don't give up. So most people aren't that, right? Like it shows you the majority of people are not that story, but everybody wants to be that story. And if you can't fully be that story, I bet you could get really close to that story if you put on a pair of Nikes. And that's how Nike blew up.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. But that's how we all blow up. But that's marketing. So I think we should go back to the stories we tell ourselves because this isn't a marketing channel.
No, not. But no, you're right about the stories we tell ourselves, because if you look at human history, how do we pass down information through the generations? It's always been through stories. Why do we watch so many TV shows, or why do we watch our favorite TV shows? Because of the stories being told.
Mhm.
So one of the things I've realized more recently in my life is that, well, we are all creators. So if we don't like how our life looks right now, why not change the story? Why not create a new story? And that in itself sounds scary and sounds made up for many people. For me, it did too at the beginning. But then you realize that everything that you have in your life has come from your thoughts and your beliefs. So in other words, you made up a story in your mind, and then reality showed it to you. Well, your reality, I guess. Right? And that's what everything is a story means to me. Literally everything. Like us having this conversation right now is a story that your mind made up for you and my mind made up for me. And of course, we can include our higher self and the universe. But it's a story, right? It's a story that, you know what, Ashley is cool. I want to chat with her. I can learn from her, and I can share my knowledge as well. And likely it's something similar to you, right? So anyone listening to us right now, I would say it's very, very similar. You all have stories. There's a reason why you're here today, right? It's because of a story that you've told yourself. Good or bad doesn't really matter. You're the one that decides that. And that's how I see it. I'm not sure what you think, Ashley, but that's pretty much for me. Everything that we have in life is based on a story that we told ourselves at some point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm really going with at least the stories is like how we interpret the things outside of us is the story we tell within us. So I'm looking from my viewpoint as more of because so often, as much as we are creators, we also there's things that get created that we didn't want created in a way, like people die, there's car accidents, there's death, there's destruction, all of these things. And it's really about what the power you have, which is your perception, which is your perspective, and
Mhm.
the power to shift that, which is really a story, right? Which is really shifting from this is a positive experience to a negative experience. And so call it what you want, call it your perception, call it a goal, call it a dream, call it a memory. It's all a story. And I think when you see it as a story like that, I'm getting kind of like motion sickness, Constantine. I'm just kidding.
Trying some new things.
I'm zooming around the
Yes.
screen. But when you when you call it a story, I think it really gives credit to what it truly is, because a story reminds us how light it is, how easily it can be shifted, how easily it can be perceived differently. Um, yeah, I mean that's like the biggest thing I do with my clients. It's about, I always use the word narratives, which is literally a story. But going back and understanding their stories, and then choosing, is that the story I want to follow, or do I want to shift that story? And then the ultimate goal is in the moment being able to fully choose your story when you're experiencing something. Yes, honoring the immediate reaction that occurs, but then realizing you can choose different. And I believe there's always two like key narratives of a story that you can choose from, and there's only ever two. And one is love and one is fear. And so, yeah, the details and, the shiny objects within the story and the punchline and the conclusion and all of that can always look different and elaborate, but the essence behind each story only has two options:
Yeah.
love or fear. Oh, look, we're celebrating.
We have to
Yeah, that
celebrate.
was a mic drop. I feel like my Mac is always on point. If someone is watching this and understands what this new update is, please share with me. But I feel that every time I say something pretty good, my balloons come. So I'm not sure.
I mean, keep in mind, everything is energy, right? So
Yeah.
the computer is energy, the internet is energy, which means
Yeah.
it can be manipulated by your higher self, perhaps giving you a pat on the back. Like, yes, actually, you did good. um, I guess let's
Oh,
get
whoa, there
on
you
with,
are.
yeah. There were, oh, that's me. Wow. Uh, no, I love that, Ashley. And what keeps coming up for me as you're talking about it too is you and I chatted about this a couple of weeks back, I think, or maybe more. Now, this idea that we're talking about the crying versus smiling and being pretty much, or the fear, the pain, and the happiness, and how they're essentially could be one and the same, right? Depending on how you look at it, your perspective. To me, it always brings up this idea of things happening to me, things happening for me. And like I can see, for example, let's say you're crying about something that happened in your life. Let's say someone left you, right? And that's because I've seen in my life, because I've been in the situation where it's like you're crying because it happened to you. And then as you start to understand the benefits of whatever happened, and you shift to, okay, how is this happening for me? That's when I feel it switches from crying to laughter. Because you're like, I can't believe, yes, I missed that. Yes, okay, now I see it. And I know you always talk about the third level, which is how have I co-created this, or why, right? Getting very curious about why has this experience shown up in my life. And that's really what I see these days. Like, if something happens in my life, and not if something, I mean, things happen all the time outside of our control, with our control, is getting curious and asking these questions. And you and I had a beautiful conversations on asking better questions a few weeks back. And that's what it comes down to me. And if I ask better questions, that means I'm likely going to get better answers, which means I can create better stories for myself and my environment. And if you look at stories, the best stories that you have out there, at least the ones that have drawn in the most people towards them, are the ones around the hero's journey, right?
Mm.
So there's a hero usually starts as no one, maybe even surrounded by evil people, or an environment that's not very conducive to who the person could be and should be. And then eventually, through trial and error, and through a lot of sheer will and support, right, with the right mentors, that person becomes the hero in the journey. And those are stories you see in Star Wars, you see in all the Marvel movies, pretty much, right? Like, you see it everywhere. And those are the most popular, by the looks of it, stories that people resonate with the most. So my question to you, Ashley, what's your hero's journey story, and how do you share that?
Mm. I don't know. I mean, what's my hero's journey story and how do I share that? I
Well,
think for me, it's really living it. And
mm,
then just being and just showing up authentically and transparently, um and no longer strategically, if that makes sense. I, for so long, and I know you brought this up, I think it was a live, Constantine, or maybe it was one of just our conversations, other than that was live, but you brought up being a chameleon. That's what I call it, for so
yeah.
long, where you, and that was me growing up. You could throw me in a room of homeless people and I would make friends with everyone. You could throw me in a room of billionaires and I would make friends with everyone, because I knew exactly how to read people and knew exactly what to provide them of what they were seeking in any moment, in any conversation, in my body posture, in everything. I just had it so mastered, because I think, because as a small child, I was just so loud and radiant and stuck out like a sore thumb, and was told, like, don't do this, don't do this. And so then I started just like doing everything possible to fly under the radar, to be one with everyone else, which meant you had to understand everyone else. You had to really be able to watch them in the moment and be like, this is what they're seeking, and that's what I'm going to provide. And like, I'll just slide under the radar. Um, so for me, it's been a transition of like finding my way back to that loud, obnoxious girl, but like the pendulum swinging so much into one side of that, and then back into like really being cognizant of how I'm sharing it and pointed in how I'm sharing it for specific purposes. And then now I'm just like, I just free. I'm just like, the best. I see myself as a student constantly. And, though sometimes it may appear that I'm in the role of the teacher, I'm truly always just a student. And so I think the best way to help others step into their optimal place of being that optimal student is to just radiate that and, shine your light, be the light. So I don't like that's like you could have asked me this 2 years ago, and I literally have. I'll bet you I could go back in my Google Drive, a document. Kendra Hall, amazing storyteller. She like works with Target and all these other people, but I was blessed to hear her before her business really blew up. She spoke to a group of Beachbody coaches, and that was back in my Beachbody days many years ago. And there was only like a handful of us on there, and she really talked about your hero's story, your hero's journey. And I literally have a Google document called My Hero's Journey. And it was a well articulated, written out story. And that was, about my weight loss journey and stuff. But I don't know. I don't like think about that anymore, I guess. I just am constantly focused on choosing my stories that I tell myself within.
Yeah.
And then I know it just kind of radiates out.
Well, I mean, if you think about what you just said there, right, it's so beautiful because I would imagine most of us have more than one hero's journey because there's different journeys that we embark on life, and some are simultaneous, some are not, right? And eventually, you all realize it's the same story, just at different stages. And I would say very similar to you, right? If I look at my last 2 years, that began a hero's journey, let's say. But then so I had one, for example, when I moved to Canada, right? That began a different journey. And then when I embarked on my, let's call it university journey, right? Or my professional poker coaching and playing journey, right? Like all those.
I don't know about that.
You did?
That's a side note. You
Really?
did professional poker like on the TV?
Well, other than, well, as in like on playing on a professional, meaning like I was
Yeah.
doing it full time for a living, making good money for a long time. I was a
Wow.
professional poker coach for probably more than a decade, really, in my
Wow.
20s to mid 30s. I still coach to this day, but very rarely. And yeah, so that's a story in itself, right? Like we have all these stories in our life, and the question always comes to me now is like, well, you have those stories, why not share them? Because in the story there is so much wisdom that you can go back and learn more from, because I'm sure there's many parts of it that I haven't learned enough from, but then others can get inspiration and empowerment from it. Like when I started sharing more about my poker journey, I was at Podfest in Orlando, a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And some people was like, "Oh my god, I just started playing. Can you help me? Can you show me?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I started talking about poker again, which has been maybe a couple of years since I visited that. And I was like, "Oh wow, I still remember all of it, and it's still fascinating me. This is interesting, right?" So it gets you to, if you start sharing your story, it gets you to find more lessons within those stories, but maybe find something that you've lost along the way, let's say. And what I had lost in that moment for me was perhaps the passion I had not to play the game, because the game was the game, but to actually share my knowledge with others, inspire others to perhaps play the game just for fun, but not lose as much money or not lose money at all, right? And that was what was fascinating to me back when I was coaching, and it was empowering me because I was teaching mindset and psychology type I was coaching on mindset and psychology, which was very different from most coaches back then. And I've realized that was really a precursor to what I do today, which is the story I'm building now, which is helping individuals, including myself, with their stories, with their mindset, with their psychology, which is the foundation of everything that we have, the thoughts and beliefs that we have about ourselves, others, and the world. And if you think about your thoughts and beliefs, I like to go back to that again because it's so, so important and something I overlooked for many, many years. Those are what create your stories, your reality. So if I ever thought that I'm not good enough, which was a thought I had for a very long time, despite my outward success, then of course my stories reflected that, right? Everything, my reality reflected that to me as well. So anyway, that's what I would like to add there. But I know we keep going back in a circle there, and And if I look at my hero's journey right now, so I can answer the same question I asked you, it started with my spiritual awakening back in 2022, right when I embarked on the journey to Ecuador and then coming back. And I had many trials to go through, many lessons, and there's still many right now. But on the other side, I came out as someone that's, well, took some time to look inwards, took some time to do some healing, and there's more healing to be done on my end. And now cannot wait to share more and more with others, right? I mean, I've been doing this for the last year and a half, but every day becomes a blessing because there's someone else I can inspire and empower. And that starts with me, always starts with me. If I can do that to myself, then I can really do it externally. So that's how I see the stories fitting in. And if I haven't really sat down to draw out a hero's journey, but there's so many examples in our lives.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think too, like this will take us even deeper that I don't think often people think about is I think a lot of people stop at uncovering their stories when they get to what you just called like your thoughts and your values of like worth and stuff. But the real juice and meat and potatoes is that is actually a story, that is a story you've been telling yourself, and it started out as a story. But so many people just stop there and they think, okay, I feel unworthy, so now I need to believe I'm worthy, and then so they may do affirmations in the mirror or meditations or all these different very surface level things. But the key is that is a story. You need to understand the origin of that story, and then, maybe the story underneath it is even deeper. And this is just like my 7 whys deep. I mean, really, these lives, we put different words on crap, but everything comes down to usually the same, like, fundamental pieces. It's just what do you call it instead? So the 7 layers deep is really unpacking your stories, right? It's the why, which is when you answer that why, it's a story. When you answer that why, it's a story. Because when I say everything is a story, this cup, I only know this is a glass cup because of the stories I'm telling myself. And those stories were learned by observation or by direction as a child. I mean, I don't know if I brought up this example in our lives before, but I think of The Little Mermaid. She, the seagull or whatever tells her that a fork is actually a brush. I can't remember in the moment what they call it, but so she uses it as a brush. So it's because she didn't have a different story, and she wasn't tapped into the universal story that that's a feeding utensil, that's how you eat. So it didn't matter, she just created whatever story. And I think that moment, Little Mermaid was always my favorite movie growing up, and I never really understood why, because I wasn't big into fairy tales. But maybe it was all of like the hidden truths within the movie. But that one right there it shows you how easily you can choose a different story, and how easily a story is created, a narrative that you then live by. And I've talked about my white car I drive now and how I got to that place, because I started to really get curious about why I operated with everything, which means I really started to dig apart all my stories. And I was moving to Florida, I was going to buy a new car, and I called my mom up. And when I was looking, I was primarily looking towards silver, and that's like the color of most of my vehicles all my life, and including my family's, my like family of origin. And white was just never an option. And I didn't know why. I just knew like white was an option. My mom's like, "You better not be getting a white car." And I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yes, I cannot stand white." And I'm like, "Oh, snap." Is that her story or is that my story? And granted, people are like, it doesn't matter. Like, that story doesn't matter, but it does. Because how you do one thing is how you do all things. So if you are not willing to uncover the silly little stories like that and to test them, you will never be able to test the big stories, the ones that may actually be impacting your life. Because literally, how you do one thing is how you do all things. So, my mom said that, and now, and this was a moment in my life that like I was gung ho on unpacking all my stories, a little to the extreme. But whatever. It was a beautiful period. And so, bet your ass, I bought a white RAV4 and I absolutely love it. And I would have never known how much I love a white vehicle if I wouldn't have been exploring that, if I wouldn't have been open, if I wouldn't have been curious, and if I wouldn't have leaned in with it with love. And because I lean into stuff like that, or like, why do you wear your shoes in the house? Why do you not wear your shoes in the house? You're just going to continue to operate by all these stories that aren't yours, that you didn't choose. They were chose for you, they were taught to you. And that's what, like, marketing counts on, right? They target their stories. They count on that they can try to give you a story that you don't even realize they've given you, that causes you to spend millions at their store. And they've, of course, mastered their ability to, because nobody is checking their stories. Nobody is consciously aware of why they do anything they do. So, of course, businesses can feed you a story and create your story, and you will never know. But you will go dead broke, and they will become even richer in the process. Okay, that was like a tangent, but it's truth.
Oops, let me make sure I change this properly. I'm still learning how to navigate this, but there we go. I love that story and everything you covered. I mean, if you look at, let's say, those of you that have a partner right now, what comes up for me is there was a story that you put out when you started dating, right? And they did the same thing. They had a story that they shared with you, and you bought into the story, and that's why you're here today, right? And the story evolved over time, and maybe parts of the story that weren't revealed initially got revealed over time, and then you had choices to make. But one thing that I want us to bring back to, and I talk about this a lot, and I think actually you and I chat about this, is that for me, it's all about awareness. So you mentioned the example with marketing. Most of us are not aware of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories others told us that now we believe and show up in our life. And it all starts with awareness. Just becoming aware of your thoughts and beliefs. Just become aware of how the story starts, and then getting curious, like you did in the example with the white car. Mm-hmm. And to me, the way it comes up is that so like I have a framework I use in my life, and it's based on my many years in organizational change management. And in fact, I have multiples, but one of them is simple as just ACT, or ACT, right? And the A in ACT stands for awareness first, acknowledgement, and acceptance all in one. What do I mean by that? So I become aware that something is a story in my mind, or something I don't agree with, let's say a thought or a belief. Well, before I get to make a choice if I want to do anything with it or not, I likely have to acknowledge and then accept that this happened. It's not something I can change from the past. I can change in the moment, but it's not something I can change from the past. So for me, as soon as I accept, like coming from a place of love, like you said, it's like, you know what? Yeah, this thought is not mine. I understand, right? It's come up again and again, and I made some choices. That's okay. And then the C in ACT is the choice, right? Because once you're aware, you're accepted, you acknowledged everything around the thought or belief, you have the choice to do something with it. Because I bet you that, and this is something I just realized it connects so well here, is I talk about how when a thought or belief comes up in your mind, and you actually get to become aware of it and look at it, you will likely have proof in your life of how that story ends. So if you allow the thought to exist and then manifest itself through feelings and emotions, and then that will cause more, and then eventually actions and outcomes, you know how the story ends, because likely you've had that happen many times before. So if you don't like how the story ends, that's your opportunity to make a choice and take a different action, right? That's where the T comes from in ACT, right? Because now I'm taking a different action. Take a step forward, right? Take a leap, if you may, right? Like take a leap of faith, because you know that you can build a better story, because you don't agree with the current one. So if you don't agree with the current one, that means that there must be a better version out there, right? At least that's how I want to say outside of spirituality, how my mind operates using psychology, using physiology, using how the human brain functions and neuroscience. I'm curious to see your thoughts on that because actually that's the first time I articulate it like that. But you hear
Yeah.
this all the time. People say it's like, you know how the story ends, so why not change it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so beautiful. And it's funny, acronyms, how they just work so easily in our mind. But I have a similar acronym that is called CPR squared. And it's essentially get curious, shift your perspective, release the weight, and remember your truth. So, releasing the weight is like releasing the story and remembering your story and readopting that. Um, but the thing, I think one key difference that I heard in which you were explaining versus where I like really try to see things now is that it's not about that there's a better option. I don't really believe that bad or good or better or worse actually exists. That's another
Yep.
story. So if we're trying to use a story to layer on choosing a new story, I think that's where it gets like dicey because then you start having like multiple stories and then that's when it's like multiple layers of the onion trying to make a decision for you. So I really work with my clients to see that it's just another option because also what can happen in that moment of like taking that step back and bringing awareness, um you have to be aware when you're doing some of these things that you can cause harm in the process, and that's where like professional dangerousness comes in to working with humans, period. But you can actually create more shame and guilt because you're bringing that awareness to like I chose the bad decision, I'm making the bad action. And when we start to label that there's a better option or the right way or things like that, then it automatically subconsciously we store that the action we've already taken is one that is negative. So I mean that's like even the deeper rabbit hole, and not that what you're saying is wrong. I'm just saying for me, what I have found in that, oh, look, I get thumbs up now. Look at what the shit. For me in that process is just really relieving all judgment, more like that curious child of like, okay, I'm doing this, but guess what? There's this out there too. Which one? Which story do I want? Like this fun, exploratory, no weight on any story. No story is better than the other, but depending on a story you're trying to achieve, a story you're trying to create, a story you're trying to experience, this story might help you get there quicker than this story. But it doesn't mean neither story is right or wrong, if that makes sense.
No, it does, but I have a feeling that's, if I may, a very advanced level of looking at this, because at least the way I see it with my clients and people in my life, most people cannot make the jump from just first becoming aware of the stories to what you said is like, oh, there's no weight, this is not better or worse, it just is, right? I feel like there's a progress that has to be made, because if you all your life you thought a certain way, and to have such a big leap, I'm sure some people can do it as the same way some people win the lottery, but
But
most people, from what I've seen, you probably have to take some gradual steps.
so I think that's a misnomer, Constantine.
Mm-hmm.
And I get where you're coming with that because I would have thought that too. But that thought alone stops people from doing it. So I'm not saying that your first thought is, "Oh, these are the same." It just is. None is better than the other. I still to this day when I'm looking at story options I'm like, "Oh, that one's way shinier. That's way better." And then it's about choosing different. So it's about even using that power of story in that moment where you're like, "Oh shit, judgment. Okay, it's okay. We judge, but we're going to release the judgment." And if you don't start trying to integrate that narrative in,
Yes, of course.
then you never will. So when people think there's stages, immediately my mind is like, fuck that. Like, I've already got enough shit to do. I like that is not a stage I want to get to if there's all this work to get there. And that's why I'm a firm believer of rip that band-aid off now. And it's all about acknowledging when you don't choose the way you want to choose in that moment and being like, yeah, Okay. Well, I let fear get in. Yep. But right now I'm gonna choose love. And
Well,
that is
yeah, that's why I had to acknowledge and acceptance as part of the first step, right? Because to me, all three are exactly it. And everyone, like you said, has a definition of what's right or wrong, which is a story. And to me, that's empowering for the person going through the change, because if you get to a point and realize that you have your own definitions and don't have to go by the definition of someone else, then you can start to change the stories. And again, if you want to give them a label, because you just said, you'll see that some stories shinier than others. I mean, that's by our definition, right? You could show me the same stories and I could be like, no, actually, I don't agree. It's the other way around. Right. And then I believe that there's in our life, there's always going to be stories, right? Like there's going to be definitions. The big question to me then comes down is like, how many of those stories or definitions are yours, like what you truly believe, and how many are based on outside forces, your parents, your caretaker, society,
well,
politicians.
that's where the why comes in. I mean, if anybody goes back and watches the questions live, I did it live with you.
Mhm.
And I asked you why until we realized that wasn't your story. And you got you shut down in that moment because it didn't have legs to stand on. That is how you pick apart a story. That is how you break it down to understand, is this really my story? Is you get to that point where you're like, oh snap, this
How,
doesn't feel good.
how about making it your story? So let's say there is, it's not your story, but you realize, you know what, this is fine. I'm going to adjust a couple of things and make it my story.
Mhm.
I feel there's a lot of power in that too, because
But
we don't
that's the
have to
next,
make a
you
whole.
first have to break a story down. You always have to understand the origin of a story before you can rebuild a story. So, yeah, that's the moment. Like, so in that moment, you realize you were living by a story that wasn't yours. But if I remember right, it was a story that you didn't want to live by. It was a scarcity story or something, a
I
story that
don't
was
remember.
holding you. It felt like you felt like it was holding you back in your life. Um,
Yeah, I think
but
we picked
then
a random one because I couldn't think in the moment of what story. But anyway, go ahead.
yeah, but then you get to choose different. But you first have to bring it down to understand that. Otherwise, you're just um doing like what mindset work does, where it's just kind of the icing on the cake, but if there is no cake under the icing, eventually it's going to collapse. You know what I mean? Like you really got to build that cake. You got to build a foundation. But I want to just share this, Constantine, because it popped in my head when you were talking and I was like, wow, that would be amazing. So I brought up stories and how that's how all these companies sell. And there's such a belief today, or a want or a yearning, um, of this world to shift to a higher level consciousness, right? Like there's the grand awakening everybody talks about and this grand shift. And I see the opposite. I see people more sold than ever. What I would say is that it if in fact, so for me, that's not my goal. My goal is outside of consciousness, but you can use consciousness as like a stepping stone to get to the point of like, oh, consciousness doesn't even exist. But when you're looking at the levels in consciousness, and I look in there and I think about what we're talking about, you would know that we have made a massive shift in consciousness when no one can be sold, when no one can be put on a sales call and be sold something that they didn't already plan to buy. Because I mean, that's how sales 101 is. You're more aware of that person's needs or wants or pain than they are. Therefore, you push at it and you sell them.
Yeah.
But if everybody had a higher level conscious, to me that means they are so self-aware that they could never be sold. Because they had, I mean, yeah, they could hop
Well,
on a
there's
sales call,
no
but
no
they
need for
knew
selling
before.
it then, right? There's no need for selling. It's just
Right?
like
That's what I'm
if
saying.
I'm a
It
silent
just
rapper, I
is.
can just come to you and be like, I know you have what I need. Let's transact,
Exactly.
whatever the transaction may look like.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's what I think like a higher level conscious world would look like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I still go back to stages though. I I still see the world in a way. I mean, in our lives, in stages. Like there's sometimes when you can make quantum leaps, and when you learn how to do that, then the stages disappear. But for most people, I include myself there because I see my own journey. There's still various small stages
Oh
or
yeah.
to go through before I can
N-
make a quantum leap.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about like the grand awakening everyone talks about, which would resemble a quantum leap, right? In the grand awakening, the shift of consciousness to that of 5D, or I'm talking about the big talk all over social
Yeah, the,
media.
the analogy, yes, no, you're right. The analogy I see with that, to be honest, is I mean, the one that comes up for me is that let's say you're in a vehicle, right? And let's say the old age of war and keeping people apart and all that stuff is coming to a stop, right?
Mm.
But it's not like anyone is putting the brakes on. It's like someone took the foot off the accelerator because other people were able to let's say get in the way. So then it's going to coast to a stop. And at the same time, people are getting out of the car and moving into a new vehicle that's going to start to take off, right? It's going to take a bit of time to accelerate to get at the maximum speed. So the way I see the Great Awakening in this example is that we might be at the beginning of it, right? We just got in the car, we're warming it up or whatever, started to press the acceleration. It's going to take a bit of time before it gets to a point where it can actually manifest itself the way you described it as well, or it shows up more around us. Because to be honest with you, and it's likely because I'm on this path myself, but I see more and more people waking up. But at the same time, the people that have, let's call them, been asleep, they're deeper into sleep than
Mm.
before, right? So you have this just a position of like sleepness versus awakeness. But again, it's like that's my definition, right? Everyone has a different definition for that.
Right, because I was gonna say, like, okay, well, tell me what waking up means to you. You know what I mean? Like, so that would be a great
Well,
conversation. I
yeah,
should
I
write
mean,
that
we can do
idea
it next
down.
time, but like I'll tell you really quick. Waking up for me essentially looks like becoming aware of these stories that everyone is feeding us, and then we end up living everyone else's dream and not chasing our own, and not realizing that we are all powerful creators or piece of creator. We're all one in the end, which means that you can do anything and everything you want to be doing if it's coming from the heart, right? So like when you get a
Mm.
realization, that means you now again have choices to make to put yourself on that path. And that's I would say in my mind the first step to awakening is realizing, becoming aware of the power you hold and the lies you were fed all this time. And again, the lies may not have necessarily been ill intended, because my parents didn't want anything bad for me by passing down what they knew. My teachers, most of them, didn't want anything bad for me by passing down what they knew or what they were told.
Mm.
But the way I see it is, I think you talked about this on our podcast, but the idea of like generational trauma and how if you want something to be different down the lineage, assuming you have children, then you have to be the change you want to see in that lineage. Like it has to start with you. So you can put an end to whatever behaviors or things you've inherited from your ancestors, right? Immediate family and beyond.
Mm.
And that's how I see it.
Mm. Yeah. I think that's why I call them stories, because stories just kind of releases the weight. And I think so often, um, I just did something the other day. I don't know if it was a video or what, but talking about how we so often want to blame and point fingers to the way we live today. And really, that keeps us stuck in the past and holds us back from being in the present moment and untying the stories. Um, yeah, I mean that's a whole nother discussion
Yeah.
for another day. But I brought that thing up about being sold though, because it just like came to me and I was like, shit, yeah. Like that's when we would know we were like that we are at the higher level consciousness, but still in the illusion, is we couldn't be sold. I mean, I would say, like, I saw Hermes, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a designer bag that everybody has to have
Oh
these days.
yes. My partner told me
Yeah.
about
Yeah. Yeah. And like, they're like Rolex and other luxury people, where they really make this like scarcity, or you have to spend lots of money with them to have access to certain bags or things they sell. So they've created the narrative, right? They've created this narrative of scarcity. They've created this narrative of hierarchy, and we all feed into that so grandly. But when it doesn't go our way, then we want to throw a fit. So then there's like people suing now because they don't like the way Hermes does it. Well, that's the only reason why Hermes is as popular as it is because it's like almost untouchable to get one, just like Rolex, right? Rolex's marketing is all about the story of scarcity and the story of, if you have a Rolex, you are, of superiority, you are of, hierarchy and wealth and all of this. And that's why people want it. What if all of a sudden today, Swatch, I mean, they already kind of did this. They kind of paired with Omega. These are watches, but Swatch all of a sudden shifted their narrative, and all of a sudden the wealthiest people in the world were wearing plastic swatches and saying this is the symbol of wealth. If you have this $10 plastic red swatch, but there's only 3 made in the world, it would go crazy, right?
Yeah.
But see, it's these stories, and then when all of a sudden the story doesn't go our way, we want to blame. Hence these women suing Hermes in California.
I mean, people are suing everyone for everything these days.
Yeah, because the stories. They're not, it didn't, the lady that spilled coffee in her lap and burnt herself at McDonald's, and now every McDonald's cup says it's hot.
Yeah, I mean, there's all stories in the end, and what keeps coming up for me to share, and I know we talked about this last time, but I was able to do more reflection on it this week. Is a story around my fear of cold water, which was, now the more we dig into this, the more obvious it becomes. So for those that haven't caught it last week, I'll share a bit more of what my reflection brought up, and I'm curious to see what you think, Ashley, because I've realized that all my life I've been not afraid, but not a big fan of cold water, meaning that even if it's a warm summer day and the lake is fairly warm, I would be reluctant to go in and I would not have a good time unless the water was like 100 degrees or whatever, right? In that case, I would be happy. But if the water was like 70 degrees, 65, 75, 80, which is, for Canada, lake water, that's fairly normal, or ocean here in Canada, because we're not in Florida where it's warm. And I thought that's normal. I thought, that's me. Not once did I question the fact that there might have been a story, and especially not my story, that would prevent me from being able to go in the water. And as you know, Ashley, the story goes that last week when I was at the spa and I did a cold plunge, I was able to go for 3 minutes and eventually 5 minutes the same day without any struggle, when before the best I could do was 30 seconds because of the story that was in mine. And what changed is I got curious. Instead of running away from the fear that kept coming up, or fighting it with more fear, which you and I talked about, I dropped in, got curious, became aware, acknowledged, accepted, came from a place of less judgment or no judgment and love. And all of a sudden, the story presented itself. And it was the story of my mother. How she was about 25, I was 2 years old. She fell through a dock into the cold water below, and her fear transferred over to me through our auras, because she was holding me. I was 2 years old, yet I could see this vision as I got curious and I got into it. And then I got to validate this with my mother a few weeks later. I asked her, hey, can you remind me of the story? And she told me pretty much what I saw. And she reiterated the fact that, no, my feet barely touched the water. Yes, it was a spring day in the mountains in Romania, very cold. But she made it all the way in the water, and it was, of course, a big shock, a big fear, a fear for her life, fear for my life, fear of the cold water. And that transferred to me in that moment and became my story. And never in my life until recently, so I'm 40, right? For 40 years, I never questioned the story because I thought it's normal. I thought that's my story. I thought that, or not, I didn't even think it was a story. I just thought it was. And I believe that's now because I've come to that realization. I'm like, oh, like you with a white car and with your mother, It's like, oh, what else is not my story?
Hmm.
Around
A
money,
lot.
around health, around dieting, around losing weight, like you name it, right? Like you said a lot. I would imagine if because I have a math background, so let's throw a number. I would say like probably 90% of the stories I have are not mine. That's what I
Right.
feel right now. I made some progress from like 95 to 90 in the last 2 years, but I feel like there's a lot of stories that we get to break down. Now, here's the key though of someone another key, a question for you more. There are some stories that even when you break them down, I would imagine you realize, you know what, it's not that bad. Maybe I'll change a few variables and I'll use the story. I'll continue to use it. I make a choice to keep the story in some shape, form, or way. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely stories that I continue to use, like not wearing shoes in the house. Right? That's a story I grew up with, and then
Same.
that's I think that was one of maybe my earliest like intentional stories because it was so easy to just understand. Um because I don't want crap tracked in my house. I don't like the way it feels on my feet, and I want to keep a clean house. So yeah, that's a story I keep, that a clean house, you don't wear your shoes in it. Right? That's the story. So then when I go to friends' houses, unless they say keep your shoes on, I take my shoes off because that's my story I live by.
But see, that's the beautiful that part that I love about this is the story you were told was based on the times when the story was made up, when maybe there were less streets and sidewalks that were paved. There was more mud being brought up in the house, more disease, right? Because there were less things or less medicine or less discoveries to fight disease with.
Mhm.
So to me, if you look back at like those, it makes sense why the story existed. You took it and you adjusted it to your current time, and I think that's where the power is, to be
Right.
able to take a story, break it down, understand which parts were serving you back then but no longer serve you, let those go, and keep the parts that serve you and add any other parts that would serve you as well. I think
Well,
that's
and I
power.
think it's like the whole intention too is like knowing that everything is a story. So yeah, you go down this journey of breaking apart a lot of stories, and I think the big piece is just to really ingrain in you that everything is a story. So then in any moment that something is not favorable, or you're choosing fear over love, you already have this knowledge of that's a story I'm telling myself. I
Correct.
can shift it right now, and then you shift it. But because people, if anyone's watching and they're like, that's stupid, why would you care about any of that, like wearing your shoes in the house, eating with fork, what color car you drive, things like that, those don't seem to hold you back. But I said earlier, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you really are interested in getting deep in the stories that are hard, the stories that feel uncomfortable, the stories that appear to be holding you back based on your stories, um that's the first way to start, is to just start simple. Start with the things that aren't so threatening to the ego. Because let's be honest, the stories you really want to unpack are the stories that fears behind it. And those are owned by the ego, and the ego will retaliate.
Let
Um,
me ask this because I think this is important here. Actually, isn't every story that we've come to believe until we start doing this work essentially based in fear? Like, even, I mean, look at the one about the shoes that you talk about, or the white car, or me with the cold water. Those are all stories based in some form of fear.
mm, I don't know about the white car. My mom just didn't like it. I think
But there's a reason. I mean, I would. Okay, I'm curious because to
I
me,
mean, I don't know. I guess we'd have to sit back and really look. I think our deepest, truest stories that we're trying to remember are all extensions of love. We're not trying to relearn, we're trying to remember and get back to those. So I
well,
do
yes.
think we have stories of love. I think a beautiful representation is go spend, a couple hours with a small child, and you'll see all the stories of love. And if you really watch a parent, like at a store or somewhere where fear tends to come up in people, stress, weight, that you can literally witness in the moment new stories being written for that little kid.
But that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pure stories, right? The ones that we want to get to. I'm talking about, let's
The
take
ones on
me for
top.
the first 35 years of my life or 37 years. Like, most of my stories were based in some form of fear. Now,
Yeah.
most, I say, not all, because I'm sure there were some loved ones right around dogs and animals and in general, but like there's, now that I think about it, there's a lot. I will obviously have to meditate on this and reflect on it, but I realize we're coming up on the hour here, Ashley. So
Oh crap.
I know you have an
That flew by.
important date in the sun, so I don't want to keep you
The
away from
beach.
that. Yes, of course. And I guess I'll just do a quick plug for my event coming up on Thursday. So for those of you that may have not seen this yet, I have a live event, a 2-hour event. It's free, and the topic is peak performance without pressure. So we're going to take a scientific approach. We're going to look at the thoughts and beliefs, like Ash and I were just talking about, how those are shaping your reality and how we can start working with our brain, with neuroplasticity, to start rewiring everything that's within us, right? Our nervous system and subconscious mind and brain, so then we can have better stories to build. We have the possibility to look at the positive and not just the negative, to reshape our focus. And really, the workshop is all about helping you create more time in your life for the things that you want to be doing. And there are 3 pillars that I talk about a lot myself, and I help my clients with, and I help myself with. And one, of course, is the big foundation piece we just talked about. And what Ash and I discussed today is a big part of it. The second part is getting clear on your why you do things, what your purpose is, perhaps, and having a good vision to go with that. And we'll talk about them more. And of course, the last part is really getting clear on your gifts and strengths. I do strongly believe that everyone is a unique being. We're all one in the end, but in this life, we're all unique. We have gifts that we're not always aware of, and we have strengths that we've built over time, and we not often tap into them enough, and we focus too much on our weaknesses and building those up, when we know that if we focused a lot more on our gifts and strengths, we will get a much better return for our investment. And the investment is time, resources, you name it. So that's the event. You can go to my YouTube channel, you can go to Instagram, you'll find links. I'll put a link in the chat right now where you can register. So registration is free. The event is 2 hours. It's Thursday, March 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. And that's me.
Yay.
Thank you, Ashley. And I'll let you wrap up as well.
Yeah, no, check that out. That's gonna be amazing. That is your first free event, which is so exciting. Yay, 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 right?
Yes.
Super exciting. Well, I don't know. I'm Ashley, and I hope today's live helped you to see that you're living by stories. Oh, and I should share, like, Patreon. So we do this, I think twice a month now through the Patreon channel. So the Right Minded Thinker, which is $33 a month donation tier. And you get to be a part of these conversations with Constantin and my partner Patrick. I don't have the link on me right now, crap, but I can put it in the description. But next Sunday is Easter Sunday, and I know a group of us plan to come on live here on YouTube and talk about our personal beliefs and connection to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, and how that symbolizes in our life, and what we really see of it. So I'm really, really excited for that one. It's on a day we usually don't do the Patreon call, but if you would love to join us, hop on, sign up to be a right-minded thinker at Big Miracle Energy Patreon. And yeah, we would love to see you, or just tune in and watch us and comment and be a part of our Easter Sunday discussion.
Yes, can't wait. It should be fun. In the private chat there, Ashley, I gave you the link to my event registration if you'd like copying that and posting it in YouTube for your audience, in case any of them are interested to join us. Yes. And that's pretty much it. Thank you, everyone. I know it's been a beautiful conversation. We value you as an audience member, and thank you for being here with us. I know there's a million things you can be doing with your time, and we value your input. So thank you for being with us, and we'll chat next week.
And I will put here, how do I put it in the chat? I have the link to the Patreon.
So on the right hand side, you'll see chat. So open the tab. And then you should see your channel. You should. So you did that in the private chat. You want to go in the public chat, which is on the right hand side.
Yeah, it doesn't let me chat in there. You must only get 2.
No, we should. Like, last time we did, right? You could see someone else's conversation.
Yeah,
Well,
but I
we
can't
can
chat in it.
debug it next time.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.